Okay, we're back again with the 2.07 lesson. We were in the midst of the reading, so we're going to finish this up. Here we're going to start with Wilson's idealistic foreign policy. Taft's successor as president, Woodrow Wilson, took a more idealistic approach to foreign policy. Oh, did I skip something? Took a more idealistic approach to foreign policy than either Roosevelt or Taft. Like his predecessors, he wanted to advance American economic interests abroad. In doing so, he believed he would be serving humanity at large. As he told one group of businessmen, "You are Americans and are meant to carry liberty and justice and the principles of humanity wherever you go. So go out and sell goods that will make the world more comfortable and happy and convert them to the principles of America." Wilson's religious faith and sense of high moral purpose often guided him in crafting America's foreign policy. He detested European imperialism as a form of exploitation. He believed the spread of American influence would bring freedom, democracy, and peace to the globe. But in pursuit of this vision, he wound up intervening in the affairs of other nations even more forcefully than Roosevelt and Taft. His moral diplomacy first faced a serious challenge in Mexico. Since gaining its independence from Spain, Mexico had experienced a turbulent political history. In the early 1900s, Mexico was ruled by a dictator, Porfirio Diaz. Under his regime, rich landowners and businessmen prospered, while the majority of people live in poverty. While Diaz ruled, American businessmen invested more than $1 billion in the oil industry and other Mexican businesses. In 1911, Francisco Madero, the leader of a reform party, led a revolution to overthrow Diaz. Madero became the democratically elected president of Mexico. But in 1913, he was assassinated in a plot by one of his generals, Victoriano Huerta. Huerta went on to make himself dictator with the support of American businessmen who trusted him to serve their economic interests. The newly elected President Wilson indignantly refused to recognize Huerta's government of butchers. To recognize Huerta's government would have violated its principle of supporting democracy over dictatorship. Wilson told a visiting British diplomat, "I'm going to teach the South American republics to elect good men." The president looked for an excuse to overthrow Huerta. He found out when Huerta's soldiers arrested several American sailors on the shore leave who had accidentally entered a restricted area. Mexican officials quickly released the Americans and offered profuse apologies. But American military officials and President Wilson chose to interpret the arrest as a gross insult to the United States. In April 1914, Wilson sent troops to seize the Mexican port of Veracruz. In the Battle for Veracruz, American troops killed more than 150 Mexicans. When Latin American nations intervened to make peace, Huerta surrendered the leadership of the country to a rival leader, Venustiano Carranza. Although Wilson had authorized the sale of arms to Carranza's forces, Carranza turned out to be a staunch nationalist, unwilling to bargain with Wilson. In response, Wilson threw his support to Carranza's opponent, the rebel and bandit leader Pancho Villa. But when Carranza seemed to be defeating Villa, Wilson reluctantly recognized Carranza's government. And for revenge for what he considered to be Wilson's betrayal, Villa in early 1916 invaded towns in the American Southwest and murdered dozens of Americans. Wilson sent American forces led by General John J. Pershing into Mexico to punish the bandit leader. The American troops never captured Villa, but they clashed with Carranza's soldiers. It looked as if the United States and Mexico might go to war. But with much larger war in Europe looming, Wilson backed down and withdrew American soldiers from Mexico. Wilson's actions, however, left many Mexicans resentful toward the United States. Intervening in the Caribbean. Wilson certainly believed in the ideals of democracy, but at the same time claimed rights to direct affairs in countries whose governments did not meet his democratic standards. In 1915, the Caribbean island nation of Haiti descended into chaos when mobs overthrew a dictatorial government. Wilson responded by sending in the Marines. The United States occupied Haiti until 1934. Although the U.S. occupation brought stability and some development to the country, it was bitterly resented by many Haitians, thousands of whom died fighting the Americans. Wilson also intervened in the Dominican Republic, which shares the island of Hispaniola with Haiti. In 1914, Wilson helped create a democratic government in the Dominican Republic by sponsoring elections. But in 1916, when the new government threatened to default on its foreign debts, Wilson sent in troops to occupy the country. They stayed until 1924. We have become a world power. In 1899, reflecting on the consequence of the Spanish-American War, President McKinley said, "And so it has come to pass that in a few short months we have become a world power." The United States had turned away from its isolationist past and proved that it could compete with the empire builders of Europe. Its newly won territories in Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and the Philippines demonstrated the nation's global reach. McKinley's successors, Roosevelt, Taft, and Wilson, did not acquire new territories, with the exception of the Panama Canal Zone. But they claimed a right to police the Western Hemisphere, intervening in Latin American countries when affairs there threatened American business interests or when they failed to live up to American standards of democracy. Some in the United States protested that this American version of imperialism was a distortion of the nation's ideals, while others gloried in their country's growing power and prominence. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, compared with some European countries that competed enthusiastically and sometimes ruthlessly to expand their empires by gaining more colonies, the United States remained conflicted over imperialism. The reform spirit of the progressive era kept popular attention focused on domestic concerns more than foreign policy. At the same time, the long tradition of isolationism kept many Americans from supporting colonial battles. In 1914, however, when the European continent broke out in war, the United States would be compelled to weigh its economic and security interests against a long-held resistance to foreign conflict. The nation would find that, as a world power, it would be drawn into world conflicts. And here's just a political cartoon. The eagle spreads its wings from Puerto Rico to the Philippines, symbolizing the reach of the American empire. Fighting yellow fever. This is a kind of a neat historical close-up that we're going to go through. Just after the Spanish-American War, as U.S. troops remained stationed in Cuba, American officials grew concerned about the risk of yellow fever, malaria, and other tropical diseases. The most prevalent disease, yellow fever, began with fever and uncontrollable shivering, and then moved on to excruciating back pain, thirst, and yellow skin. Finally, victims coughed up black blood until they died. Yeah. An outbreak of yellow fever in Havana, Cuba, led the Army to appoint a commission to study the spread of the disease. Many people thought the disease was spread through unsanitary conditions or contact with infected people. But in 1900, Major Walter Reed, a careful medical researcher, proved otherwise. Pursuing a theory proposed by Cuban scientist John Carlos Juan Finley, Reed conducted experiments that proved yellow fever was carried by a specific kind of mosquito. The experiments involved human volunteers. Some who agreed to be bitten by the mosquitoes contracted the disease and died. Their sacrifices helped save many lives. Reed's findings led to the understanding that the spread of yellow fever could be greatly limited by destroying the watery breeding places of the disease-carrying mosquitoes. The U.S. Army's Walter Reed Hospital in Washington, D.C. was named in Reed's honor. And here's this cartoon. I think it's quite, gets to the point here. The cartoon depicts death waiting in fever-ridden swamps for the builders of the Panama Canal Zone. Many workers died from yellow fever. Because you can see it says Panama there, the Grim Reaper with his, just waiting for people to collect. Reed's research proved of great importance when a few years later the United States took on the task of building the Panama Canal. Colonel William Crawford Gorgas, who had helped Reed's team fight the spread of yellow fever in Cuba, was placed in charge of the fight against yellow fever in Panama. When Gorgas arrived in Panama, he found mosquitoes everywhere, kind of like Minnesota. Most people consider the flying insects little more than an annoyance. Gorgas found no screens or windows nor mosquito nets over yellow fever patients. Everywhere he looked, he saw pools of standing water, the perfect breeding ground for mosquitoes. Gorgas set out to eliminate standing water, install screens, and cover beds with mosquito netting. It was exhausting work. Every drop of standing water in this rainy climate had to be dumped or covered. Back in the United States, more politicians dismissed the campaign to eliminate mosquitoes as balderdash. But Gorgas pressed on. He and his men fumigated countless homes. They filled every ditch they could find and sprayed every open pool with sealing oil. Pipes were installed to bring running water and thus discourage people from storing water where mosquitoes could breed. In 2 years, Gorgas and his team brought yellow fever under control. One day he gathered hospital staff members around a corpse and told them to take a good look, because this was likely to be the last victim of yellow fever they would see. And it was. Here's a picture of William Gorgas, who understood the connection between mosquitoes, standing water, and yellow fever, led the U.S. effort to fight the disease in Panama. All right, let's go back to our lesson. You should have your reading guide done. And then let's look at the online activity, Roosevelt, Taft, or Wilson. Okay, so our instructions are: presidents give speeches for many purposes in many places. Lincoln's Gettysburg Address served its own purpose, and it became a significant part of the American memory. Some speeches capture the ideals of the president while also delivering a message for the future. Washington's Farewell Address gave direction to the United States that lasted well beyond his lifetime. Presidents Taft, Roosevelt, and Wilson all had clear policies and philosophies that were expressed in the words they spoke. Read the excerpt and identify the speaker by dragging the image of the president who made the statement to the question mark. Then the following screen, select the best interpretation of the excerpt. Remember Roosevelt's belief in high ideals and a strong military. Taft's commitment to business and open trading, and Wilson's quest for world peace in the context of neutrality. Okay, so the first one.
Presidents give speeches for many purposes in many.
Okay.
Presidents give speeches. Presidents give speech. We must show, not merely in great crises, but in the everyday affairs of life, the qualities of practical intelligence, of courage, of hardihood, and endurance, and above all the power of devotion to a lofty ideal which made great the men who founded this republic in the days of Washington, which made great the men who preserved this republic in the days of Abraham Lincoln.
Okay, so who do you think said this? Looking at the dates as well, 1905. Courage, hardihood, and endurance. I'm thinking it's going to be Roosevelt. Let's check. Good job. Yes.
What is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
We must show not merely in great crises, but the everyday affairs of life, the qualities of practical intelligence. I think it's going to be B. American ideals should be lived every day, not just in critical situations. Yay!
Come, let us be comrades and soldiers yet to serve our fellow men in quiet counsel, where the blare of trumpets is neither heard nor heeded, and where the things are done which make blessed the nations of the world in peace and righteousness and love.
That to me sounds a lot like Wilson because of the peace, righteousness, and love part.
What is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
To me, where it says, let us work together and blessed be the nations in peace, I think it's going to be B. Nations should listen to one another and get along. Very
The
good.
American people must either build and maintain an adequate navy, or else make up their minds definitely to accept a secondary position in international affairs, not merely in political, but in commercial matters.
All right, that sounds like Roosevelt.
What
And
is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
I think it's going to be A. Without a strong navy, the United States will take a back seat in world policies, politics, and economics.
The past year has been marked in our relations with China by the conclusion of two important international loans, one for the construction of the Hukuang railways, the other for carrying out of the currency reform to which China was pledged by treaties.
Well, we remember the open door policy came up during Taft, so let's check if that's right.
What is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
Did the Chinese currency reform? No. Chinese relations led to the construction? No. The United States made two significant loans to China in 1 year. Good job.
Every man who really loves America will act and speak in the true spirit of neutrality, which is the spirit of impartiality and fairness and friendliness to all concerned.
Okay, that sounds like Wilson. Once again, talking about neutrality and friendliness and morality.
What is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
People that love America will act and speak fairly, impartially, and in friendship.
Then, too, there are expenditures of government absolutely necessary if our country is to maintain its proper place among the nations of the world.
Okay, so we're talking about necessary expenditures of the government. I'm going to say that's Taft.
What is the best interpretation of the excerpt?
Government must spend certain monies, which means monies, to keep their place in the world. And that's the end of that. Now we just have to look at the chapter highlights and be done with this lesson. The late 1880s saw the closing of America's frontier and a new interest in a more international future. Imperialism promised raw materials and new markets, and some supporters used social Darwinism to justify new policies. The United States purchased Alaska from Russia and annexed Hawaii despite strong Hawaiian resistance. Yellow journalism increased American interest in Cuba's independence movements and eventually helped lead the Spanish-American War. The Spanish-American War ended Spanish rule in Cuba and brought the United States and the new territories of Puerto Rico and the Philippines, even though Filipino rebels fought U.S. control. Anti-imperialist sentiment grew among those who saw imperialism as anti-American, as well as those who feared an influx of cheap labor and the potential for an increase in the non-white population. President McKinley stressed an open-door policy with China that was interrupted briefly by the Boxer Rebellion. McKinley's second term was cut short by his assassination, and President Roosevelt became president at 42. I'm almost out of time, so I just wanted to say remember to take the 207 quiz at the end. That will be questions from lesson 206 and 207. Good luck.